Welcome back to the deep dive. You know how this works. You send us the deep, dense historical documents, the research, the articles, and we try to piece it all together into a story that makes sense.
And today's story is, it's a fascinating one. We're going back to a period that is so critical for understanding, well, everything that comes after, but it often gets glossed over.
Right. We are diving deep into the Jewish return from Babylonian exile. It's an 80-year window?
Yeah.
Stretching from about 538 BC to 458 BC.
It's an absolute goldmine of source material. And what you've put together here, it really synthesizes the history and the prophecy beautifully. This is the post-exilic restoration. This is where a community that was completely shattered by judgment had to figure out how to be Israel again.
And the sources really shine a light on people like Zerubbabel, Joshua, Ezra, Nehemiah.
And the prophet Haggai, he is, for our purposes today, maybe the most vivid voice of all.
The whole narrative here is so interesting because it's not this story of, continuous, glorious success.
Yeah.
Not at all. It's about survival and spiritual reorientation and what happens when this massive, divinely ordered project just stalls.
It grinds to a halt.
So our mission today is to figure out the message that's buried in this timeline. Specifically, why did the temple construction stop dead in its tracks for 16 long years?
And what did it take? What was the message, this profound but simple message, that was needed to restart the hearts and the hands and, frankly, the finances of a community that had chosen comfort over their covenant?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really get the magnitude of their failure, we have to start with how bad the catastrophe was in the first place.
Absolutely. You have to start there. The starting point is 586 BC, the destruction of Jerusalem and the magnificent Solomon's temple by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon.
He didn't just conquer the city, he leveled it.
Leveled it, and took the leading citizens captive. And you have to understand, this was so much more than a political defeat. For them, it was a spiritual apocalypse.
So what's the immediate practical impact of losing the temple? I mean, on a day-to-day level.
Well, for centuries, their entire religious life, everything, was based on the Mosaic law, and it all revolved around the temple. The sources remind us that they just couldn't practice the formal Levitical worship anymore.
The sacrifices, the offerings.
All of it. The whole ritual system, what was often called their cult, it required the authorized altar and the temple itself, and they were gone. The entire structure of their national religious life just evaporated overnight.
So their faith had to adapt, right? Out of sheer necessity. That's a huge piece of history that comes out of this period.
It is. The sources confirm it. While they maintained private prayer and they often prayed facing toward the ruins of the temple in Jerusalem, they had to innovate.
And this is where the synagogue comes from.
Exactly. This period in Babylon saw the rise of the synagogue. Now, these weren't replacements for the temple, not at all. But they became these vital, informal centers where the community could get together, hear the law, read, study, and just maintain their identity. It was a massive cultural shift that they probably didn't even intend.
But it's what allowed Judaism to survive outside of its homeland.
It provided the infrastructure, absolutely.
And it's this time in Babylon that gives us the famous 70-year captivity. But the notes you sent over reveal two really interesting ways that this time was measured. It shows history isn't always so simple, is it?
It's a great point. It shows the flexibility of prophetic interpretation, even among the people living it. The prophet Jeremiah, he had foretold a 70-year period of judgment.
Okay.
So the sources reflect two ways they understood that prophecy to be fulfilled. The first way, it's based on the initiation of judgment. So it runs from the first big deportation to Babylon in 605 BC all the way up to 536 BC.
And 536 is when they laid the foundation for the new temple.
Exactly. So that calculation sees the judgment as ending the moment the physical restoration work begins. It's focused on the people's timeline in exile.
But there's a second way of counting it.
There is. And it's, you could argue, more profound from a spiritual angle. It runs from the utter devastation, the destruction of the temple in 586 BC, up to the temple's actual completion in 515 BC.
So that way of counting, the 586 to 515, it emphasizes that the spiritual problem, the lack of a functioning temple, wasn't solved until the building was actually done.
Precisely. It shifts the whole focus. It's not about the people's captivity anymore. It's about the captivity of the land and the temple itself. But either way, the message was clear to them. The era of judgment was over, and a new phase of grace was beginning.
And the agent of change wasn't a military victory or some Jewish revolt. It was a huge geopolitical shift. Persia takes over Babylon.
Right. In 538 BC, Cyrus of Persia issues his famous edict, and he allows the exiles to return home, and this is the crucial part, he allows them to rebuild their temple.
And the sources talk about a few ways of people coming back.
Three main waves over the next century, but it's that first one, the foundational group, that really gets our narrative moving.
And that first wave was huge, especially when you think about the logistics of travel back then.
Nearly 50,000 Jews returned in that initial wave. It was led at first by a man named Sheshbazzar, but the real leadership quickly became Zerubbabel, the governor, and Joshua, the high priest.
And this is happening around 537, 536 BC.
Correct. And it's really significant to note that our key prophetic voices for today, Haggai and Zechariah, they're identified as being part of this group, so they're on the ground from day one.
And their initial action was swift. It shows this massive national enthusiasm.
Oh, absolutely. The enthusiasm was undeniable. In 536 BC, almost as soon as they get there, they rebuild the altar.
Which means sacrifices could start again. That's a huge leap back toward their covenant life.
A massive leap. They celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles, which is this powerful symbolic act, and then they laid the foundation for the Second Temple.
The foundation was laid, the cheer went up, and then the wheels just came off almost immediately.
Yes. The sources are very clear. The work stopped almost as fast as it started. And this was, at first, entirely due to external opposition. And we have to pause here because you have to understand this opposition to understand the 16 years of paralysis that came next.
Okay, so tell us about this opposition. It wasn't just, neighbors being unhappy.
Not at all. The sources, especially the Book of Ezra, they point specifically to the neighboring groups, mainly the Samaritans.
And the Samaritans were this mixed-race population left in the area after the Assyrian conquest, right?
Exactly. And they resented the, let's say, the purified religious and political status of the returning Jews. They saw this whole restoration project as a threat to their local authority.
So what were their tactics? How did they actually stop the work?
Well, they were smart about it. They weren't just shouting across the building site. They used the bureaucracy, the sophisticated mechanisms of the vast Persian Empire.
So they played politics.
They played politics. First, they tried to join the project, which the Jews refused. When that failed, they started this campaign of obstruction. They discouraged the people. They hired political agents, counselors, to frustrate the plans. And most effectively, they wrote letters to the Persian court.
And what were they saying in those letters? What was the charge that made the Persian king stop the work?
This is where they were brilliant. They didn't argue about theology. They argued about finance and sedition.
Things the empire would actually care about.
Precisely. They dug into historical records and claimed that Jerusalem had always been a rebellious city. They warned the current Persian king, Artaxerxes, that if this city were rebuilt, the Jews would absolutely refuse to pay tribute and they'd revolt, jeopardizing the whole western flank of the empire.
That is a serious charge.
Yeah.
Especially for a new administration.
It is. And they successfully played on the empire's paranoia about rebellion. So this external pressure, combined with a change in who was in charge in Persia after Cyrus, it led to an official decree: halt the construction.
And the result was the critical long pause. 16 years. 536 BC to 520 BC.
That's it.
So the community had a genuine, legitimate excuse, right? The king ordered us to stop. But the question is, how did they use those 16 years?
And this is the historical backdrop to Haggai's message. That external opposition, it gave them the perfect rationalization, and the community seized it. They didn't just wait around. They actively diverted their energy, their resources.
They shifted their focus.
Completely. From the national priority God's house to their own individual comfort. They got busy rebuilding their own homes, and often quite lavishly. A deep apathy toward the temple just settled over Judah and Jerusalem. 16 years of, we'll get to it later, became a chronic spiritual sickness.
It's such a lesson in the psychology of distraction. An external pressure gives you a temporary stop sign, and it's so easy to confuse that with a permanent, divinely sanctioned vacation.
And that is exactly what Haggai found. The initial enthusiasm, it didn't just disappear, it was rerouted. The resources meant for national restoration were used for private consumption.
Which brings us right into the heart of Haggai's message in chapter 1. The prophet doesn't even bother with the political opposition. He goes straight for the internal spiritual failure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The genius of Haggai's prophecy is that he wasn't calling for political resistance. He was confronting their spiritual hypocrisy. His purpose on the surface was simple: motivate them to build the temple.
But the deeper purpose was more profound.
Much more. It was about confronting their misplaced priorities and their failure to live up to the terms of the Mosaic covenant. which was the very reason they'd been exiled in the first place. They hadn't learned their lesson.
And the sources give us that amazing specificity, the exact date of his first challenge, that kind of historical precision. It really grounds the whole story.
It was delivered on the first day of the 6th month in the 2nd year of Darius I. That corresponds exactly to August 29, 520 BC, 16 years after they laid the foundation.
And he directs it right at the top.
Straight to the top. Zerubbabel the governor and Joshua the high priest. The message was clear. The leadership had failed by tolerating this apathy.
And the people, they had their perfectly constructed 16-year-old excuse all ready to go.
Their rationale, according to the Lord's message through Haggai, was this: the time for rebuilding the Lord's temple has not yet come. They had convinced themselves that the political problem, the opposition from the Samaritans, was proof that the timing just wasn't right.
But Haggai just slices right through that political excuse and gets to the moral reality of their lives. He uses that famous rhetorical trap, that direct confrontation of their spending habits.
It's a sharp, immediate, and utterly devastating question from the Lord. Is it right for you to live in richly paneled houses while my temple is in ruins? This is the moment their spiritual hypocrisy is just laid bare for everyone to see.
And the source material adds that really embarrassing detail about the materials they were using. This wasn't just passive neglect, it was an active transgression.
That insight is so profound. King Cyrus, when he let them return, he had given them money and resources specifically to buy superior timber, probably imported cedar or cypress wood, for the temple.
Okay.
And it is highly probable that the Restoration Jews took that expensive, high-quality material and just diverted it. They used it to build their own luxurious, richly paneled homes. They literally used the resources meant for the divine mission to secure their private luxury.
They took the national priority and used it for private gain. And the prophet tells them, think carefully about what you are doing, linking their selfishness directly to their current economic misery.
This is the core teaching on covenant unfaithfulness. Because they put their own house first, they weren't experiencing God's promised blessing in the land. Haggai details the systemic, environmental, and economic punishment they were suffering. It reads like a textbook case of the covenant curses from Deuteronomy.
Let's walk through that list of frustrations. How was this economic punishment showing up in their daily lives?
It was just this all-encompassing futility. They were planting a lot, but harvesting very little. They ate, but they were never full. It was this deep, persistent dissatisfaction. They drank, but were still thirsty. They put on clothes, but couldn't seem to get warm.
And that phrase that just sticks with you, the one describing the futility of their work.
It is the perfect ancient metaphor for profitless effort. The sources quote it: those who earn wages end up with holes in their money bags.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine? You earn your pay, you put it in your purse, and then later you realize half of it has slipped away. The effort was real, the labor was real, but the fruit of that labor just vanished. Their wages were profitless because the Lord was actively withdrawing his blessing.
I think we need to pause on that because that principle, it transcends history, doesn't it? It speaks to this psychological crisis of working harder and just getting poorer.
It's more than just a bad economy. It's God saying, I am personally sabotaging your self-centered projects. When you're so focused on getting financial comfort for yourself first, you never actually reach a state of secure comfort. You're just eternally chasing a dollar that has holes in its bag.
It creates anxiety and exhaustion.
Which should have been their signal that something was profoundly wrong with their priorities.
And the reason for all this scarcity was crystal clear to them. It wasn't just a random drought.
No, the Lord stated directly that he was the actor in this drama. He said he called for a drought on the land, and when they brought their meager grain harvest home, he blew it right away.
What does that mean, blew it right away?
It suggests the grain they did manage to harvest was tiny, light, and substandard. It just separated easily from the heavier kernels during threshing, metaphorically blowing away with the chaff. The sky withheld its dew, the earth withheld its produce.
And this drought wasn't just hitting one crop. It was a total environmental collapse.
It affected everything: the grain, the new wine, the olive oil, and critically, the people, the animals, and everything they produced with their hands. The Lord was making sure that their neglect of his priority resulted in the collapse of their own priorities.
So the lesson is unmistakable. The personal suffering, the holes in the money bags, was a direct consequence of neglecting the national covenant priority.
The explicit reason, as the source states it, is because my temple remains in ruins, thanks to each of you favoring his own house. It's this direct link. If you focus only on yourself, God will ensure your self-focus produces nothing of substance.
So after this incredibly pointed sermon on August 29, 520 BC, what's the reaction? Did they push back? Did they argue?
Remarkably, no. The message was so powerfully timed and so accurately described their miserable reality that it generated immediate conviction.
Ooh.
The leaders, Zerubbabel and Joshua, and the whole remnant of the people, that's the obedient core of Israel, they showed reverence and they obeyed.
The speed of that response is amazing, especially after 16 years of apathy.
It's the spiritual turning point. The sources confirm the work on the temple resumed very quickly, just weeks later. On the 24th day of the 6th month, still in 520 BC, their obedience was corporate, visible, and swift.
And the Lord's response to that obedience was just as swift.
Yes. He sends a message immediately to Haggai just a few days after they restart the work. I am with you. That assurance of divine enablement was crucial. It guaranteed their success, not because of their own strength or resources, but because they were finally carrying out God's will.
It's that key insight. God's presence guarantees success when you're doing His will, and our obedience causes Him to draw close.
It's a reciprocal relationship.
And that shifts the entire story, doesn't it? It goes from this immediate challenge to the need for long-term endurance, which leads us right into chapter 2. They picked up the hammer, they started the hard work, but now they face this huge psychological hurdle of comparison and perseverance.
Exactly. I mean, just imagine the scene. They're digging out these dusty old foundation stones, maybe seeing remnants of Solomon's temple, the one their grandparents bragged about. Their small efforts must have looked, well, pathetic, especially when compared to that magnificent past.
And the Lord addresses this exact issue during the Feast of Tabernacles.
The message comes on the 21st day of the 7th month, so October 520 BC, about 2 months after they restarted the work. And the Feast of Tabernacles was the perfect backdrop. It's a harvest festival that looks back to God's faithfulness in the wilderness and looks forward to the final messianic age.
And the Lord doesn't minimize their discouragement. He actually validates it by asking this direct, painful question.
He speaks right to the older survivors, the men and women who had actually seen Solomon's temple, which had been destroyed 66 years earlier. He asks them, "Who among you survivors saw the former splendor of this temple? How does it look to you now? Isn't it nothing by comparison?"
Wow. So he acknowledges that their current project looks hopelessly inferior. That feeling of inadequacy could be absolutely crushing.
It could be.
So what was the counter-strategy to that deep despondency? How did God move them past that feeling of we can't measure up?
The counter-strategy wasn't a practical construction tip. It was a mandate of spiritual resilience, and he repeats it 3 times. Take heart.
To the leadership and the people.
To Zerubbabel the governor, Joshua the high priest, and all the citizens of the land. The remedy for discouragement in the face of daunting odds is always to remind yourself of God's word of promise and His guaranteed presence.
And that promise was anchored firmly in their own history, in their identity.
They were reminded of the covenant promise made to their ancestors when they left Egypt, and that His Spirit was still in their midst. It was essentially telling them, the same power and presence that brought your ancestors out of Egypt is with you right now as you build.
They could identify with that Exodus generation.
Because they too were a remnant who had just recently left captivity in Babylon. The command was simple: do not fear.
But the Lord took it so much further than just encouragement. He gave them this staggering, future-oriented promise of cosmic glory that just transcended the small, inferior building they were working on. This is where the prophecy turns radically eschatological.
This is the prophecy of supernatural interventionist action. The Lord promised to once again shake the sky and the earth, the sea and the dry ground. And this shaking is, well, it's universally understood in the sources as describing a great, terrifying, world-altering event. A global earthquake that signifies the Lord's direct intervention in human history.
And the sources even draw a clear line from this specific prophecy into the New Testament.
They do. The writer of the Book of Hebrews quotes this exact passage from Haggai and then adds the theological insight that those who are in Christ have an unshakable kingdom that will endure this coming cosmic earthquake.
So Haggai's prophecy, which was directed at these few builders in 520 BC, is still waiting for its ultimate final fulfillment.
It places their small building project into this massive global context.
But the shaking isn't just the physical environment. It's also geopolitical.
Absolutely. At the very same time, Yahweh promised, "I will shake up all the nations." This means disrupting and overturning the political, military, and governmental structures of the entire world. It's a promise of a massive world event where the stability of the Gentile nations, the very empires that exiled them, will be shattered.
And this global political upheaval leads to a massive transfer of global wealth, all dedicated to the temple.
The sources explain that the desirable treasures, the wealth of the nations, would come in to fill the new temple with glory. It echoes that historical event of the Egyptians giving their wealth to the Hebrews during the Exodus. The Lord declared, "The silver and gold will be mine," reinforcing his absolute ownership and his ability to orchestrate this.
So the message is, even though your current building looks like nothing by comparison, the future splendor of this temple is guaranteed to be far greater than Solomon's ever was.
Yes. And this promised future glory, often interpreted as the millennial temple, is coupled with this deep, lasting promise of peace. And in this place, I will give peace.
And since neither that ultimate glory nor that lasting messianic peace happened with this second temple.
Right. The sources confirm this promise is future-focused. It's waiting for the Messiah to return and establish true global tranquility. Their small effort today was the required step toward that massive future.
So the people have started working again. They've been encouraged by this glorious cosmic promise. But the sources indicate the hardships didn't just vanish on day one of construction. So why the delay in the full agricultural blessing?
This brings us to Haggai's third major oracle. This one is delivered about a month and a half later, in December of 520 BC. Work had resumed in late September, but the full, overwhelming agricultural blessing they desperately needed, it hadn't started yet.
And the Lord had to address that.
He had to. He had to address this complex issue of the lingering effects of past covenant unfaithfulness, and he explains it through the law of ritual purity.
This is such a crucial teaching point about delayed consequences.
It is. Haggai used 2 priestly purity tests to explain the situation, asking the priests directly about how the law works. The first question was, if holy meat dedicated in a sacrifice, if it touches common food, does that common food automatically become holy?
And the answer, according to the law, was no.
No. So holiness, or dedicated goodness, it's not easily transferred. It doesn't just spread automatically.
You have to guard it.
Exactly. Holiness must be meticulously guarded. But then Haggai asks the second, more difficult question. If a person who is ritually unclean, say, from touching a dead body, if they touch food, does the food become unclean? And the priest confirmed, yes, the uncleanness would be transferred. The food would be unclean.
Let's just pause there to make sure we're all getting that spiritual mechanism. It sounds like uncleanness is much more contagious than holiness.
It is a profound analogy for life, isn't it? Think of holiness like electricity. It has to be specifically channeled and contained. It doesn't just jump to ordinary things. But uncleanness, like disease or corruption, it's instantly contagious. It spreads effortlessly.
And the application of that to the community of Israel was devastatingly straightforward.
The Lord declared that the entire nation was unclean in his sight, mainly because of those 16 years of putting their own homes first. And because of this corporate uncleanness, all their effort, everything they offer is also unclean.
So even the temple construction materials, the resumed sacrifices,
After being offered by an unclean people, their past covenant unfaithfulness was still affecting the present purity of their effort.
and the sources give the exact data on the ongoing hardship, reinforcing just how bad things were right before they started the work and why they were so desperate for the blessing to resume immediately.
Oh, they had been suffering catastrophic shortages. They were expecting a heap of 20 measures of grain and finding only 10. That's a 50% reduction. They'd go to draw 50 measures from the wine vat and find only 20. A 60% reduction. On top of the drought, they'd been hit with blight, disease, and hail.
So even their sincere present dedication to the temple didn't immediately wipe out the previous sins and their corresponding punishments. The consequences had to run their course.
That is the essential persistence principle here. God is faithful to reward obedience, but he is also faithful to his word about the consequences of sin. He wouldn't just immediately erase the punishment brought on by their past failures. Sin always has negative consequences, and sometimes those consequences have to finish their course before the full blessing can show up.
You can turn the ship around, but the momentum from your past choices still carries you for a little while.
That's a great way to put it.
But the glorious shift is guaranteed to begin on the very day of this prophecy, December 24, 520 BC.
Yes, the Lord gave a guaranteed turning point. Nevertheless, from today on, I will bless you. The promise of future agricultural and economic blessings started that very day. This was the ultimate motivation to persevere. because even though the lingering effects of the past remained, the future was now guaranteed to be better because of their genuine, renewed obedience. They had moved from a curse to a certainty.
That is such a profound principle for anyone today trying to recover from, financial or personal mistakes. You can start walking the right path today, but you have to be patient for the full rewards to catch up to your effort.
Precisely. And the need for this long-term hope and perseverance leads us directly to the final, most glorious section of Haggai's message. It's a message directed not to the community about crops, but specifically to Zerubbabel, the royal representative, about destiny.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this shift from communal purity test to a specific royal prediction confirms that the ultimate purpose of this whole restoration wasn't just a building project. It was about preserving and eventually reestablishing the Davidic line, which the temple symbolized.
That is the ultimate focus. The Lord spoke to Haggai a second time on that 24th day of the 9th month, giving this final personal message just for the governor of Judah, Zerubbabel.
And the message reiterates the cosmic promise of shaking the sky and the earth. But this time, it links that shaking directly to the defeat of the earthly powers that were oppressing Israel.
God promised, "I will overthrow royal thrones and shatter the might of earthly kingdoms." He specifically promised to defeat their armies, overthrowing chariots and riders. This is a prediction of the eventual total overthrow of all the Gentile nations that were, in Haggai's day, exercising sovereignty over Israel. It assures Zerubbabel that Persia's power is temporary.
And in the middle of this massive global military overthrow, Zerubbabel, this struggling local governor, is given a singular, immense personal promise.
The Lord declared, "I will take you, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, my servant, and I will make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you."
Let's spend some time on the symbolism of the signet ring because it is so incredibly weighty. It speaks directly to sovereignty.
A signet ring wasn't just jewelry. It was the ultimate, non-forgeable symbol of royal authority, authenticity, and personal ownership. It was used by kings to seal official documents, to validate laws and commands. To wear the signet ring meant you possessed the monarch's power and were his appointed delegate. This promise meant Zerubbabel was being invested with a unique, divinely chosen authority.
And the deeper significance is that this promise to Zerubbabel directly reverses a terrifying generational judgment that was pronounced on his grandfather decades earlier. This is the ultimate proof of restored covenant grace.
This context is absolutely essential. Zerubbabel was the grandson of King Jehoiachin. Decades earlier, Jehoiachin had been a wicked king, and God had pronounced this definitive judgment through the prophet Jeremiah.
Go ahead.
God had threatened to take Jehoiachin off like a signet ring and give him to Nebuchadnezzar. It symbolized the total removal of royal authority and the end of the Davidic line through him.
So if his grandfather Jehoiachin was ripped off and discarded like a signet ring, God is now promising to make Zerubbabel the signet ring, restoring that very authority.
It is the ultimate reversal of judgment. It's the restoration of the Davidic dynasty's legitimacy through this one figure. For a small, weak community, constantly overshadowed by the colossal power of Persia, this promise was monumental encouragement. It meant their efforts, no matter how small the temple looked, were part of a covenant thread that God himself was guaranteeing.
But Zerubbabel himself never became a great conquering ruler. He stayed a governor under the Persians. So how does he fulfill this destiny?
Zerubbabel was chosen as the designated royal representative of the Davidic dynasty at that time. He serves as a prototype, pointing toward the ultimate fulfillment. The victory, the overthrow of Gentile nations, the universal authority promised through the signet ring that was all destined for his descendant, the Messiah.
And this brings up the complex issue of messianic lineage that our sources get into.
Yeah.
How exactly does Jesus Christ, the ultimate Davidic king, connect to this specific line that Zerubbabel represents?
This is where history, prophecy, and genealogy all intersect. The sources clarify that Jesus qualified as the Davidic king on two separate legal fronts. Physically, he was descended from Nathan, another son of David, through his mother, Mary.
Okay.
But legally, through his adoptive father, Joseph, he was counted as the son of Joseph, who was a physical descendant of the kings, Solomon, Jehoiachin, and ultimately Zerubbabel.
So Zerubbabel, by being the figure God declared as the signet ring, acted as the key legal bridge. He restored the legitimacy of the royal line that had been judged, ensuring that the Messiah, when he came, would have the legal right to the throne of David.
Exactly. This final message, therefore, it served as an act of pure grace and faithfulness to motivate the struggling exiles. They weren't just building a physical structure, they were maintaining the lineage and the covenant connection that would lead to cosmic fulfillment. It assured them that despite their weakness and past failures, a glorious future for their nation, centered on the Messiah, was guaranteed in God's vast plan.
That is a phenomenal journey. I mean, taking us from a ruined city, a lost spiritual identity, this profound crisis of priority, all the way to an assurance of future cosmic glory in 520 BC, and all through the lens of this tiny, struggling community and the simple words of a prophet.
It perfectly synthesizes the history and the prophecy of that pivotal 80-year period. You see the immediate painful consequence of misplaced priorities and the dramatic, guaranteed results of even delayed obedience. It turns a dusty historical account into a vibrant story of resilience.
So let's bring this all back to the present. For the listener navigating their own set of priorities and challenges, what does this all mean? Let's distill the three key takeaways from this deep dive into the post-exilic restoration and the powerful message of Haggai.
Okay, first, I think, is the priority check. The ancient lesson is eternally relevant. Prioritizing personal comfort, those richly paneled houses over higher covenant responsibilities, it leads directly to scarcity and suffering. The very detailed curses they faced, the 50 and 60% reductions, the infamous holes in their money bags, that wasn't random bad luck.
It was a direct result.
A direct result of putting their own convenience first. The lesson is so clear. If you seek to secure yourself by neglecting the greater good, you will fail to secure yourself.
Second, the persistence principle. Their immediate obedience, it started the blessing that I am with you guarantee. But the discussion on ritual purity showed that past negative consequences might need time to fade before the full reward is realized.
You can repent today, but the consequences of the loan you took out yesterday, well, they still might need to be paid off tomorrow. However, the future prosperity is guaranteed from the moment of genuine effort. It really calls us to persevere, even if the results aren't instantaneous.
And third,
Future certainty. That final message to Zerubbabel provides a powerful historical anchor. It shows how even the smallest, weakest remnant of God's people is intrinsically linked to this massive cosmic fulfillment, the messianic promise. Their current struggles were temporary and local. The promised overthrow of global power structures through the Davidic line was certain. Their present effort, no matter how small, connected them to that guaranteed glorious future.
what stands out to me the most, really, threading through this whole deep dive, is the incredible juxtaposition of the smallness of their effort and the largeness of the promise. The Lord explicitly told them their new temple would be nothing by comparison to the former glory, yet he demanded their total effort and sacrifice to build it.
Which raises a critical, persistent question about the nature of human effort, doesn't it?
The sources really forced us to confront the difference between that glorious future temple, the one filled with the wealth of all nations, established in lasting peace, and the present inferior reality they were struggling to build. I mean, what does it truly mean for a community to be asked to work diligently, to sweat and sacrifice their scarce resources on something that they are explicitly told will be nothing by comparison to what is coming?
And yet is absolutely essential for linking them to that guaranteed future glory.
Yes.
It's a profound thought. It touches on faith, perseverance, delayed gratification. It asks us to consider the eternal value of building the necessary structure today, even if we won't live to see the guaranteed, ultimate, and incomparably greater splendor of tomorrow. That connection, that link forged through present sacrifice for a future promise, that's essential for any community facing overwhelming odds. It is certainly something worth mulling over.
Indeed. Thank you for providing this detailed source material and for guiding us through this powerful deep dive into the post-exilic restoration.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.